Welcome to ConverSapien. You already know it's the podcast all about having interesting conversations with intriguing Homo sapiens. Those are human beings. I'm your host and favorite of the species, Caleb Wildman, and I want to thank you for making ConverSapien a part of your day yet again. Hey guys, it's the third episode, and I want to give a big shout out to our Super Sapiens and all other contributors who are helping the show out through our Patreon. If you want to contribute to the Patreon, you can do so by going to patreon.com/ConverSapiens. I'll remind you of that S until you figure it out. You can support the show for as little as $3 a month, or as Wikipedia likes to say, for about a month a year, as little as a cup of coffee. So if you want to help me offset hosting costs and drive more listeners to the show through social media ads, I promise that's where all of that money goes. Throw me a couple bucks. That would be awesome. If you want to support the show for $0, you can go right now to the Apple Podcast app and give us a 5-star rating. If you want to support the show for $0 and a little more effort, you could even write us a review on that same app talking about how great this show is. Trust me, that sort of thing does help us in the long run to drive more listeners by encouraging the app to show the show to more people. Hey, remember to check out the website, ConverSapienPodcast.com. I post articles derived from our episodes on there weekly. I'm hoping to turn that into a great source of information that coexist with the show. Next week, I will have on 2 fellow Cushing syndrome survivors. Cushing's is a word for hypercortisolism, meaning huge amounts of the stress hormone in your body for whatever reason. I myself had it for a little while, so I wanted to talk about it with some other survivors. So I've arranged that, and we'll have that episode up next Saturday. Today, as promised, I have on Ethan Hammond, coming all the way from England, the UK, not London, as we will find out. I don't know anything about geography. Ethan is a mobility coach, a yoga tune-up instructor, a CrossFit instructor, a whole plethora of things that has to do with athleticism and mobility. He's going to be talking with me about the 5 most common mobility issues that he sees in his practice and some ways that you could start addressing those things like lower back pain, chronic neck pain, etc. So give a warm welcome to Ethan Hammond as he comes up right after this beautiful, lovely stinger. Maybe it's Maybelline. Maybe it's ConverSapien.
You're listening to
ConverSapien.
Ethan Hammond.
Hello, mate.
Cheerio.
I don't really have a British accent. Everyone who hears me try to do one just thinks I'm doing like a really shitty Cockney accent. And even from like a shitty Cockney perspective, it's really, really bad.
So the reason that I opened by saying Ethan Hammond in my own beautiful UK accent.
Yeah, that was a UK accent, sorry.
You don't know. What do you know?
I only live here.
So Ethan's a friend of mine that lives in the UK. In what part do you live?
I'm in southern England.
Southern England, okay. Is that close to anywhere that...
It's about 2 hours west of London.
2 hours west of London, okay.
Yeah.
So Ethan moved to London, what was that, 2 years ago at this point?
Moved to England. 2 years
England.
and about 2 months.
It's fine. It's the same thing.
People know
everything. It's all the same.
Country
it's all
over
the same.
yonder.
That country over yonder. About 2 years ago, because you met a girl.
I did meet a girl.
Tell us how that went, because now you're married. You go across the pond. You marry this girl. You're happily over there teaching mobility with. Well, not with her. I don't guess she's a mobility coach, but you're married and with her. How did that come about?
So we met online playing Lord of the Rings online.
Okay.
We met, I guess it was about 2012 when we first met.
Wow.
So we had already been friends for a few years over that.
Yeah.
Like, this is a massively multiplayer online game, so you play it with people from all around the world.
Right, yeah.
And so with the guild that we were in, we did a lot of voice chatting, like coordinating stuff to do in the game.
So really, you guys already knew each other.
Yeah.
I've never played Lord of the Rings online, but I've played plenty of, I've always been, excuse me, somewhat of, that's not the Rona, I promise. I've always been somewhat of a gamer, even though I've always despised that word. And there are people that I know that, I've known from since I was in high school, and them too, and we've never met face to face, but you get to know people pretty well.
Yeah, there's a weird stigma that a lot of people have that you can't get to know someone like virtually.
Right, yeah, because they're only showing you this.
Like, they're not
face.
your real friend. You don't really know them. Like,
I think that's probably because so many people, the extent of their virtual interactions like that are so short. And if you meet somebody yeah, exactly. If you meet somebody, on Reddit or something, and you know them only in that sense, yeah, there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
But if you're like playing a game with somebody and you but are around them all the time, really, that's a totally different story.
A lot of time voice chatting and talking over Skype.
Right.
Which turned into hours and hours every single day. And I live here.
And now you live here. So if she was catfishing you, she got you.
Oh, she would have been so good if that was catfishing.
You are now hooked. You talked a little bit about some of the English differences between. Well, you didn't talk about them, but you alluded to them. So, did anything blow your mind when you went to London? As far as just differences in English?
Yeah, one of the biggest things, I think most Americans don't have any clue whatsoever as to how many accents there are in the UK.
Yeah.
England alone is approximately the size of Alabama.
Oh, wow.
And they have about 10 times the population here. And the native accent changes per about 20 miles. It's like you basically have southern accents and northern accents, and they're pretty distinct and they're similar in their own ways. But like someone from Hampshire, which is the county I live in, sounds quite different than a native person from London.
Yeah.
Vastly different, completely different from someone who was born and raised from Yorkshire, which is about 5 hours north of here. If you drive for just a couple of hours, the way people speak is completely different. And so I think most Americans mostly think of like, famous actors like Michael Caine or Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins, which is going to be a much more Cockney accent, or from like the weird little British girl in Family Guy. But I think that's what most Americans think of. And they don't realize just how many there are. There's like over 50 distinct English accents. Never mind Welsh, Irish, Northern Irish, and Scottish accents.
Have you ever run into anyone that was difficult for you to understand? Their accent was so different?
Yeah, I still get that. But when I first moved here, it was a good 3 months before my ears were trained enough that I didn't have to ask every single person I spoke to repeat every single sentence they said. Given where I live is very metropolitan. Like we have a massive Polish population. There's a massive Middle Eastern population here. So you get a lot of those accents as well.
The UK, United Kingdom. Cheerio to you and cheerio to your...
mate. Some people do actually say that, which I'm quite happy about. It's not common though. Or like calling people gov. I love calling people gov because they don't actually say that. That's not a term they say here. Which I was so disappointed when I moved here. You're ruining my stereotypes.
Governor?
Hello, governor.
If I moved over there, the first time someone said cheerio to me, I would legitimately have to contain myself.
I didn't contain myself. I got a buddy from Ireland, and he actually does say cheerio to say goodbye, and I burst out laughing when I first heard it. And I'm like, dude, that is awesome. That's the first time. I've lived here for like over a year now. That's the first time I've heard someone actually say cheerio. But you might find this interesting, there's a very strange sort of theme, and I've been meaning to like document this better, but in my opinion, from what I've observed so far, there's a bit more of a tendency to rely on context here when you're talking to an English person. So I think Americans tend to be a little bit more direct in what they're saying in terms of the words that they use.
Yeah.
I think this is really strange. There's a tendency here for Brits to use words that an American would consider to be a bit more vague.
Yeah.
Whereas they use it here to refer to something very specifically.
Do you have an example?
I have a few examples. So it's like, and I think some Southerners say this, but a stove over here is referred to as the cooker. So in order to differentiate it from all the other utensils in the kitchen which accomplish the task of cooking, it's called a cooker. It's a very general word, but it specifically refers to the stove. the oven is not the cooker. The kettle is not the cooker, even though they all cook, technically. They don't do that.
Yeah.
All vehicles that you drive over here, unless it's like a very big vehicle, like a moving van or an 18-wheeler, they're all cars.
Well, there's no like distinction between an SUV or anything like that.
You don't say SUV or hatchback or truck. A truck is like an 18-wheeler. So it doesn't matter if it's a Honda Civic, which we would call a car.
Yeah.
It's a car. If it's a Grand Cherokee, which we would call a Jeep, over here it's a car. A Ford F-150, we would call that a truck. Over here it's a car.
Ha! Yeah, that would definitely be different.
Yeah, so if you want to specifically refer to those, it's a little bit odd here.
Right.
You have to know the exact make and model and year to refer to what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I was just talking to Duncan last week, and Japan is just such a, I mean, that's one of his major observations about Japanese culture is that it's just so indirect. And there's certainly a lot of context in that. I wonder sometimes if it's an issue of other places being indirect, or if as Americans we're actually just way too upfront or something. It seems like that's a common comparison point from a lot of cultures to ours.
Yeah, I had a funny incident. So I've had a part-time job working as a barista, which is awesome. Being a barista is awesome. I love making coffee. And a coworker had brought in, it was like basically a bucket full of gummies.
Yeah.
Gummy bears and things like that. Now, when I just said that just then, you understood what I was talking about when I said gummy.
Yes.
That sort of texture. Yeah. So I mentioned to one of my colleagues, I'm like, hey, Jason brought in a whole bunch of gummies. And they're like, what? Gummies? Like gummy bears, Haribo, that kind of texture thing. He's like, oh, you mean a sweet. Had the exact same conversation. My wife just she picked me up from work that day. And I was like, yeah, would you like some gummies from the bag? I got a buddy who brought in a bunch. Like, brought in some what? Like, gummies, like gummy bears. That sort of texture candy thing is like, you mean sweets.
No, sweets is so vague.
That could mean a chocolate. That could mean plain sugar. That could be a lollipop. That could be a popsicle. Right. That could be anything. It's so vague.
Yeah.
But they just refer to it as sweets. They don't have like that specific designation for the word. And I just think it's so weird.
Strange.
It kind of makes it difficult to communicate at times.
I would imagine, because it's like, was it a sweet could be like a little Debbie cake. It could be a brownie.
Yeah. It could be so many
any kind of candy. That's really interesting. I sometimes wonder if when you look at like linguistic phenomena that happen like that, if that's reflective of, and there's some research that indicates that it is, if that's reflective of the way people actually think winds up being totally different too. So it's not just that.
I've tried to look at, there are commonalities, if that's even a word, based on your region and the way you speak like that, right? And England, imagine a country the size of Alabama that's been invaded by Vikings, by the Danes, by the Angles, by the Saxons, by the French. Right. And so you have all of these linguistic influences from all over. So you're going to get a mix of how people think. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, given America is a big melting pot of cultures, linguistically, it's based mostly off German and Latin and a little bit of Greek. I just don't think that we have as much variety in our language, like when you travel around, if that makes sense, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, could be. Talking about that, like how language is tied to what you think. Sorry, I just woke up myself. I know it's afternoon for you, but for me it's 7 a.m. I just woke up.
Where are you?
It's a little later than that.
I thought you guys were 6 hours different. I don't know.
Shh. No, it's early. I get up early because I'm responsible.
Okay. I don't know what that's like.
No, it's 10:45.
Okay.
But I did just wake up. Hey, I'm in summer mode. I'm a teacher. I'm in summer mode. Get at me. There was some research in Africa with this tribe, and you may have heard of this before, and I'm probably going to botch it. But it was a tribe that had no distinction between blue and green in their language, and they put these people in front of a computer screen and would show them squares that were blue or green. They would be fairly close, but it would be such that people who have those distinctions would easily say that's green and that one's blue. And for those people, they really couldn't tell the difference. Like, it could be either one for them.
As in, they couldn't tell that they were different shades, or
they couldn't tell that it was. They couldn't differentiate between one being blue and one being green.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I imagine that would be biological.
Yeah, I don't know. It's all, to me, it's kind of just one of those things where I'm like, okay, the problem with stuff like that is if you wanted to prove that there was a linguistic connection with the way you actually see the world in that way, it wouldn't be too hard to construe the experiment such that it gave you those results, which is why I'm sometimes critical of that sort of thing. But it's at least interesting to think about that, these people, when they grow up without the distinction, you give them the distinction, you run them through a quick crash course, like this one we call blue in English, that one we call green, and then they can't actually make that distinction even after learning supposedly that, because supposedly their perception doesn't even include it. So it makes you think, I guess. I don't know if I believe it or not, but it is interesting. All right, Ethan, you are a mobility coach, would you say? Is that an accurate word, mobility coach?
Nowadays, I've started using the term performance therapist.
Performance therapist. Okay. Well, let's talk about some performance therapy. You sent me a list of the top 5 mobility problems that you run into. So I thought maybe we would just go through these issues.
Sure.
But first things first, before we go in, and just to give some context, when you say mobility issue, what does that mean?
It means you have some sort of trouble that inhibits you from moving well and moving pain-free.
So that could be either range of motion or
motor control. So either how far can you move your joints or how are you actually moving them?
The first one that you put on here was chronic low back pain. So you run into that a lot.
Yeah, that's one of the most common things in the first world. Here in the UK, and it's similar stats in America, but here in the UK, about 80% of all cases of disability is based off of perceived low back pain. They don't know how to work with that, so they call into work.
What are some common causes that lead to that?
Pain receptors around the lower back are overstimulated.
And how does that happen?
So it changes. There's a lot of things connected to the lower back, but chiefly speaking, when we get people sitting for approximately 16 hours a day, there's a lot of muscles around the spine that in the front will get short. So there's a muscle called your psoas, which it attaches directly from your lower spine on the front, and it connects into your femur. So if your femur is raised, as in if you're sitting and the angle of your hip is closed, then this muscle will get shorter. Now, muscles adapt over time. Whatever you do habitually, your body gets better at that. And we understand that intuitively, but that includes muscle size. If you always hold your arm closed, like if you're trying to make your bicep big, and you just hold that position perpetually for 14 hours a day, your bicep's actually going to become short. Same thing happens to the psoas. So if you have this muscle that directly attaches to your low back, you go through a couple of decades of sitting all day long and that muscle becomes short. Then when you stand up, it's going to pull on your lower back.
So it's actually, the cause isn't necessarily even within the back originally. It's a different muscle.
Normally where you perceive pain, that's not actually where the problem is. That's just where the problem is lighting itself up. That's where your body's trying to bring attention to.
If someone has a mostly sedentary job, which is super common, is there any strategy where they could prevent that shortening of the psoas and the following back pain?
Get a stand-up desk. So try to stand up as much as you can. Humans function much better being stood up than being sat down. Being sat down is a very lazy, like I'm reclining right now, and it's a kind of lazy position. I'm not going to be quite as alert because my body's pretty much turned off.
So you think standing may even positively impact things like productivity because of that?
Cognitive function increases when you're stood up. Your body's more alert. It's more stimulated. It's more turned on.
I have seen before, for people who don't have access to a stand-up desk, recommendations are like get up and walk around every so often. You think that's useful as well as an alternative?
Yeah, absolutely. Because sitting isn't a problem. It's the habit of sitting.
So breaking that up.
If you sit for 5 minutes at a time, that's no big deal. But anyone who has ever driven for 14 hours straight knows that wrecks their body. Yeah,
you get out of the car and you feel it. I mean, you can literally feel it.
That's why you should drive for find a rest stop every hour or so.
Right.
Just get out and just move around just for a couple of minutes, and that will help to prevent the accumulation of that stress.
I know at one point a few years ago, I don't remember if it was a video or a comment, but you had said something about if you're going to sit at home, maybe sitting in the floor.
Yeah.
Is that something you would still recommend?
Yeah.
What's the mechanical difference there that makes you recommend that?
So if you're going to sit on the floor, then imagine what kind of shapes your legs have to be into to accommodate that. You're either going to be in a full squat.
Yeah.
You're going to be in a cross-legged position, or you may be sitting in seiza. That's not quite as popular of an option, but it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between those is that they're utilizing full range of motion in your joints. You're not just going halfway and staying there. You're using the entirety of that range of motion, and so you keep that range of motion because it's being used. If you don't use range of motion, then you don't have range of motion.
I wonder if part of that is also connected to the fact that when you're sitting in a chair, it's very easy to just get up and then get back down. But when you're sitting on the floor, you do practice that full range of motion in your hips and all your joints just to get up and down in the first place.
Yeah, you're basically just practicing a full squat over and over again if you're getting up and down like that. And most American adults cannot squat beyond halfway being 90 degrees at the knees and hips.
Yeah.
So exactly where you sit, because that's the furthest they ever go.
Yeah, you have this, I have this thing behind me that makes it so that I don't have to do that. I'll say I'm a teacher, and I'm a big believer that you can't really be a teacher and be sitting at your desk. That's a whole other thing. But I walk around all the time. When this coronavirus hit, that was the first time that I had sat down just staring at my computer all day for a long time. I've gotten a little more used to it now because I'm in summer mode and lazying about. But that first week, I've even posted about it on Facebook because I was like, it's so apparent when you're used to not sitting down. When you go sit down for a full day, it's so apparent. I mean, you could feel it all over your body, and especially
your
in your
body
hips.
will start to change, and your body will start to change very quickly if you are always sitting down and you try to stand up. Just standing up for 30 minutes is probably going to be really rough. Yeah. And vice versa as well. If you slouch all the time, then pulling your shoulders back is going to be really uncomfortable. Mm. And vice versa. If you have really good posture all the time, if you go to slouch, that's going to become pretty painful, in probably less than half an hour. It depends on you, but it'll get uncomfortable fast.
Have you ever heard of the book Healing Back Pain by John Sarno?
I have not.
I read it earlier this year, and his whole theory is that back pain, and this is probably a bunch of hoo-ha, but I just thought it was, someone said something about it on a podcast, and so I read it. But his theory was that back pain also might have like an emotional root. Have you ever seen anything like that? But I've talked to people who are like massage therapists, for example, and they'll very commonly reach a point where someone has a lot of tension, and during the massage they have an emotional response. And I guess the theory is that there's some mechanism in the body that holds on to emotional trauma in the form of muscle tension. Have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, quite a lot. We'll kind of designate these different systems in the body, right?
Yes.
I'm going to, in a roundabout way, come to the point. So, like, we have the muscular system, the nervous system, the skeletal system, the endocrine system, the lymphatic system, the integumentary system, and all these systems. They're all one thing that creates our body. We will designate these different systems to help us study them, because if we can isolate things, then we can better study that one thing. But it becomes important to put things back together. Like when we're training athletics, a lot of people have this idea, it's just about how big your muscles are. You're just training your muscles. It's like your muscles are how you move your skeleton, but most importantly is how your nervous system and your brain interacts with those muscles to create movement. Mm-hmm. And that has a lot more to do with developing your athleticism rather than just getting big muscles. So these things all work together. Same thing kind of from a psychological point of view, like we kind of differentiate between, your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, your mental well-being, but all these things, they blend together. We will differentiate things to make it easier to kind of hone in on specific aspects so we can study that better, but we also have to bring things back together. There isn't really too much of a distinction between your psychology and your physiology. They both work together. When people have emotional trauma, and I'm not an expert on this specific topic by any means, so it will be not the best explanation. I can't explain it, but I'll give my best perspective on it. Your body will have physical reactions to stress. So stress is primarily a lot of things that go into it, but when you are in a heightened level of stress, in martial arts, you might be familiar with a fight or flight response.
Yes, I'm very familiar.
Yeah. So you get hormones called cortisol and adrenaline flowing through your body.
I'm very familiar with cortisol.
And those create a whole series of responses in your body, but it's not just your body, it's also your brain, your mind that's affected. Your ability to think shuts down. Your frontal lobe shuts down. The more stress hormones are in your body. Your digestive system shuts down. Healing and immunity shuts down when you're in a fight or flight response because you don't need those things right now. So your body will respond physically and mentally under stress. You can learn to block things out when you're under a lot of stress. It may be something like when you get stressed out, you start to close up, kind of like protecting your belly, closing so you're not as vulnerable. And so people can create a habit of, if they get stressed out, they get into this slouched, hunched over position like a hunchback, right? And so their upper back can become extremely tense and tight. And what can happen, and I explicitly say it can happen, it won't always, but if that person goes through an upper back massage, they can suddenly become extremely angry or start crying or start to feel sick. So there can be an emotional reaction. There's very much a connection between your emotions and your physical body. What I get sometimes is people feeling very claustrophobic when they're doing self-massage routines. Some people will stop breathing, which is always fun.
So there's an aspect where stimulating or, if someone's slouched, like in that position due to stress, when you're addressing that, you're addressing the body, but you also wind up through that interconnectedness addressing maybe the stress itself or the emotional issue itself that comes out.
Yeah, it's like everything in your body is connected to everything in your body. And when you effectively address just like one part, that can impact all these other parts as well.
Yeah. And that's something that I didn't really appreciate until I had my own problems. But when he was talking about cortisol a second ago, I was over here like shaking my head up and down like a crazy person. I'm going to have 2 guests come on in a couple of weeks. Actually, I think next week, hopefully. One runs a group with about close to 5,000 members on Facebook that's for a syndrome called Cushing syndrome, which is basically extreme hypercortisolism, which I experienced because of taking corticosteroids. And so, yeah, you really appreciate if you're in that position how it affects your skin, it affects your muscles, and it definitely affects the way you think because your body is just in crazy mode. It affects how your body metabolizes food because you're basically in physiological fight or flight the whole time.
Yeah.
And so you have this, it definitely opened my eyes on a couple things, that whole medical issue, not just on the interconnectedness of it, but on the failure, what I perceive as a failure of Western medicine to put those things back together, like you're talking about, to put those systems back together. Because it's real easy as a kidney doctor to, for example, give you a huge dose of a corticosteroid and then have no explanation for and not even a warning that it could have these other effects on the other systems of your body.
Yeah, there's a bit of a problem with that.
Yeah, I think there is. It definitely got me questioning our viewpoint in the West, particularly on that, the specialization that fails to see the body as a whole being.
Yeah.
We talked about preventative measures. Yeah. If you already are suffering from chronic lower back pain, obviously there's no silver bullet in anything, but is there something that you could start doing right now to start addressing that to get better?
Yeah, 2 things. If you have absolutely no tools whatsoever, try to hang out laying down on your back with your legs up on a wall. That might make the pain in the short term feel worse because your body's going to be able to really sedate itself and the pain signals are going to come through heavily.
Yeah.
But it will also be a very relaxing position if you practice it and will help the tissues around your lower back to start to relax. Again, that's just starting to. It's not going to be any long-term help. If you have a tool, something that people want to get is a soft, grippy latex ball.
You just pulled that like a magician.
Always have one within reach.
His hand just went off frame and came immediately back in frame with this large ball. So yeah, go ahead.
So don't use hard tools for self-massage. There are people out there who have like metal tools for scraping people's skin, like doctors, physical therapists. Some people use metal tools, and I've talked to only literally a couple, like 2 people, who have actually experienced care from those, and they all talk about how excruciatingly painful it was to get a massage with them. Like, well, go figure, it's made of fucking metal. But lacrosse balls are like a super common massage tool.
Mm.
Lacrosse balls are meant for lacrosse, as it turns out. I know that's shocking, but that's actually what they're made for, the game of lacrosse, which is like a high-speed impact game. Now, what you want are soft tools.
Yeah.
You can see on video here, people won't see it, but it's a little bit grippy.
Yes.
It's not inflated, like you can't collapse it. It's not like one of those stress balls. But
Right.
it's got some rigidity to it, but it's very soft, which means you can put it around bones and it won't hurt you. Unless you're super sensitive, it will not bruise you. It won't cause a lot of pain. And so you can very easily, if you're really smashing yourself, you can, of course, hurt yourself with it. But using a soft tool, you can start to just massage around your lower back.
Yeah.
You can get something like a pillow, ball it up, put it on the wall, and just lay on it. Roll around just really slowly and just start to roll around. When you touch your body gently, it creates a whole cascade of sensations that gets you to relax. Your connective tissue, called your fascia, maybe you've heard of that.
I have heard you talk about fascia. I was about to ask you about fascia.
Yeah, so fascia just means your connective tissue, and there's a lot of it in your body, a lot of different types, but a lot of your fascia contains cannabinoid receptors. So cannabinoid sounds kind of like cannabis.
I was about to say, so you're saying smoke weed every day is what you're about to tell us.
So these are the receptors that marijuana stimulates. That is part of what makes you feel really relaxed when you're high. And these same receptors get stimulated when you're hugged. When you create gentle pressure on the skin, it helps to stimulate relaxation. And so if you have a problem of overtension, wherever it is, if you have pain in your lower back, the actual problem is going to be elsewhere, most likely. May not be, but it probably is. But if you just simply create some gentle pressure in that area, it will help to tamp down on the pain response and get things feeling better soon, until you can find someone who can actually help you fix the problem. So that's something you can do. It took me like 10 minutes to say that, but
no, I think it's great.
Laying down on the floor, especially with your legs up on the wall, is one of the most sedating positions you can be in. So if you're having trouble being stressed out, just simply get on the floor, get your legs up, and just breathe, and that will sedate your body way faster than anything you can do stood up. And then start creating massage around your body, all around your hips, your lower back, and your upper back. This is, again, if you have low back pain. Work upstream and downstream. If you have knee pain, work with your lower leg and your upper leg. If you have elbow pain, work with your forearm and your upper arm and shoulder. Don't restrict to the area of pain. Work all around it.
I imagine this would go back to how long someone has had an issue or how long someone has been in that sedentary position. But if someone comes in, let's say someone who's in their 50s comes into you, they have chronic back pain, they've had a sedentary lifestyle and because of their job for the last 30 years. How long, on average, would it take them to go from that to something close to pain-free, even if I don't know if they could reach it, but what do you think?
There's no answer to that. That's not vague. The best answer for that is it depends.
Okay.
It depends entirely on the person, and I'll tell you why. There are people with herniated discs in their lower back. Yeah. As in, like, you have the bones of your vertebra, and then you have a cushioned disc in between it. And sometimes those kind of like get pushed out a bit. And you can see that on an MRI or an X-ray, things will be not straight. Some people will have that disc, misalignment, and they will be in excruciating pain.
Yeah.
Other people will have it worse, and they will be asymptomatic, meaning they won't have any pain. They won't have any perceived dysfunction. They can still move their spine around without like getting whiplash, basically. And they can still, deadlift and squat just fine, no pain, no problem. And sometimes, especially for those people, their spine will kind of sort itself out and things can get back into alignment on their own. But the symptoms can vary considerably. You can look at an X-ray and you may see that's not really a big problem, but the individual is in immense pain, whereas another person will have what you might look at an X-ray or an MRI and say they have a big problem, but they may not feel anything. So if you get someone who has perceived low back pain, if they've had it for years and years, some people might work with me for an hour and they will be good to go for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Other people, I might need to see them like a couple of times a week for a while. That's a big part of why I teach self-care and get people to teach them how to do these things themselves, because then they can spend all their free time doing it. But yeah, it can vary considerably. Some people will be fine after an hour. Some people will be fine after a few months, but it depends on the problem and how that problem has impacted their spine.
Chronic neck and shoulder pain is the next thing on your list. I imagine there may be some connection with chronic back pain.
Yeah, same thing, but slouching. Slouching is the big thing.
You were saying earlier with people who are in very stressed out environments who wind up being slouched over. Would this be something that you might see from that, I guess, stress-related
Yeah, it could be.
issue?
Like when you're really stressed out, if you give in to that stress, like basically you give up.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll see this like in a fight. Sometimes people give up and they just ball up on the ground.
Yes.
It's like you're just succumbing to gravity. And that's exactly what slouching is. If you're at a desk and you lean forward, there are two big contributors to that. One is gravity. Gravity is, a constant pull or constant push. I don't really know the physics. I saw a video recently talking about how gravity isn't a real thing.
Man, don't get me on gravity. It blows my mind.
It blew my mind how convincing this guy was. Like, I believed every word that he said. And it was crazy. But anyways, Vsauce was the YouTube channel.
I love Vsauce, man.
Dude,
He's so good.
He did this one thing about gravity, and it just blew my mind. Like, I couldn't function for the next week.
I would die because gravity blows my mind. It's like stuff is big, so you fall into it. That doesn't make any sense. Get out of here.
Yeah. So, but we understand this idea that we fall to the ground. How much do you think your head weighs?
Oh my God. 10 pounds?
About 10 pounds, yeah. Average adult male head is about 10 to 12 pounds. So about 5 or 6 kilos for the non-Americans who may listen to this. I'm going to have to shift.
5 or 6 kilos?
Yeah.
I was trying to help out your audience out there.
What? Sound like a leprechaun?
Yeah.
Dude, did you know leprechauns aren't real?
No. Are they not?
No. At least that's what they tell me here.
I think they're lying to you to hoard the gold for themselves, probably.
Could be. It's all a conspiracy.
Wait till you're there for like 5 years. Warm up to them.
What was I saying? Right, so we have this understanding that things fall. And so if I have a 10 or 12 pound object, imagine just holding a 10-pound dumbbell.
Yeah.
If you hold it on top of your shoulder, you can hold it there all day long, no problem.
Yeah.
Take it 1 inch in front of your shoulder. Okay, suddenly it's a little bit heavy. It feels like a 10-pound weight now. Take it 1 inch further again. Okay, now it's a lot heavier. For every inch, that adds about 10 pounds.
Yeah.
Because of leverage. Same thing with your head. For every inch your head goes forward, that's another 10 pounds. So it's like when you're way out here, that's about 60 pounds that your upper back is trying to pull back.
Mm.
And if you're like that perpetually, it's constant. This is why trigger points, like knots in your upper back, especially in between your shoulder blades, are so common. It's part of your body's response of trying to pull these muscles back. Yeah, you get gravity, and then when you're looking at a computer screen, if it's something that like really gets your attention,
yes,
you have a tendency to move towards that.
To lean forward, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're trying to eat a mic for a podcast, for example.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to have a tendency to move forward. And so that combined with gravity can make your neck and upper back just suffer like crazy.
So when you talk about those trigger points or the body trying to naturally pull you back, do you find, well, I'm just going to state my own observation and then whatever. It seems to me, the more I have thought about physiology and things like that, it seems so obvious that the, not to get philosophical, but the ego self, the I, is this sort of consciousness that's within this being that's also the body. And that separation of those two things, or not separation, but the sometimes disconnect between those two things is something that we sometimes just take for granted and overlook. But in a lot of ways, this system that's the body that your consciousness inhabits will do things for itself and for you that are outside of your conscious control that are kind of also mind-blowing in the same way that gravity blows my mind when I think about it sometimes.
Yeah, Mother Nature knows best. Your brain is something that's like our bodies are basically just carriers for the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it has ways of doing things without you knowing that they're happening. You know, things like your heart beating, your body temperature isn't something that you control.
Yeah.
You can control
Unless
it
you're
too.
Wim Hof.
Yeah, but generally speaking, your body self-regulates in response to your outside temperature.
Yeah.
And things like that. Spatial awareness, you don't usually think about, you know, how far away the wall is to you, but you kind of know where it is without looking at it.
Or like this wall to my left, I instinctively know that if I extend my hand, I could touch it. Not only that I could touch it, but about where on my hand it would hit. Yeah.
You can close your eyes and bring your middle finger to your nose.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like anyone just about can do that. Some people may have a little bit of trouble, but your body has its own internal GPS system for regulating itself and also regulating itself in relation to the environment, and things happen automatically. And your body will try to correct certain positions because there is a standard normal. It's a range. What's normal is a range. It's a spectrum. But going too far left or too far right down the range, your body will try to bring you back. You know, bring you back to zero.
The hormone system to me is so indicative of that Mother Nature thing. It was this idea that, you know, your body is like, I don't know, a nurse that's going to like, you know, push a little, got to push a little cortisol, get this bastard to do something, you know, like that's so strange that in some ways your body will even manipulate you to do what's smart for yourself, or at least according to it.
Yeah, that can even be with avoiding violent situations. You may not think about it, but you may just be walking around town and you just get like this gut feeling that you may not even think about. Like, maybe I should avoid that area, and then you just turn, and then you find out the next day that there was a murder right there.
That all that stuff is mind blowing. We need Vsauce to investigate all that for us.
I mean, there's a book called The Gift of Fear.
Yes,
I'm sure you're familiar with.
By Gavin DeBecker.
Yeah, Tucker's talked about it a lot. And there are physiological input signals, but your body regulates that automatically. It's too much information for you to go through and, you know, manage yourself.
Right, because it's just such a barrage of stuff. You would become overwhelmed, or your conscious mind.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people will get, and this ties into the mobility work, people will be taught to ignore certain signals. And it's like women tend to be hyper conscious of who is around them because they're grown up to be, because they suffer from a few more problems, like advances from men.
Right.
And men don't usually have that issue.
Right.
So men tend to be able to get away with being a little bit more oblivious of who is around them. And so men may, over time, develop. I think everyone starts off being able to interpret these signals very well and have these gut feelings that they can listen to. But people will learn to shut off listening to certain signals because they don't need to, or they perceive that they don't need to.
So you think on average men, because they don't naturally
have to worry about rape every day?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's what it is. Do you think they are more likely to become, I guess, intuitively blind than a woman would be? I mean, that kind of explains the whole idea of women's intuition in a sense.
Yeah, I think men largely get taught to ignore a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like that, a lot of, maybe like body language, like learning to ignore it. From my perspective, women have to be a little bit more aware of body language.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
In order to avoid certain situations.
Right. I mean, it makes sense.
Because that's what they're more likely to be exposed to.
All right.
Unfortunately. So when we have things like, okay, this will get into a specific example tying it in with mobility work. Mm-hmm. So Caleb, you are a man.
Yes.
How often have you been told to man up?
Oh, yeah, a lot.
Yeah. So it's like you hurt yourself in some way, doesn't matter what, and you're told to man up.
Rub some dirt on it.
Yeah. You lost your leg, walk it off.
Walk it off.
So that gets enforced on men much more, especially in the West.
Yeah.
So you learn to ignore pain. You learn to ignore this feedback signal. Mm. That's what pain is a feedback signal. It's your body telling you there's something going on. So it's like just now, my belly rumbled a little bit because it's almost supper time. That's a feedback mechanism telling me I'm a little bit hungry. I could do with some food. Don't have to eat food, but I'm in a habit of eating supper at around 6 p.m. or so. So my body gave me this feedback mechanism. It's releasing a hormone, which is either ghrelin or leptin. I can never keep them straight. one is appetite stimulating, the other is appetite suppressing. So they're just two hormones that help to control your hunger sensations. But it's just a sensation that guides you towards a specific thing, in this case, to eat food. If you have pain, that's just a sensation that hopefully guides you towards taking care of that area. If I walk out of this room and I bang my elbow in the door frame, what's anybody going to do?
Ah, shit!
Ow. And then they automatically go to hold it, and they may even start rubbing it, or they start throwing it around. Either way, they're creating movement. But they start to address the problem. Now, if you have elbow pain, the exact same spot, except instead of it happening instantaneously hitting the door, you instead have it slowly develop over the next decade, and people will ignore that. And when it does happen, because there's no, strict incident of when and where it happened, it wasn't like you hit something. It just kind of happened. Typically with those kinds of things, you also get told to man up, ignore it. But it's your body telling you, I need some help, and you learn to ignore it. And so things just kind of cascade from there. And then you go 20, 30, 40 years down the road, and then you've got a problem. When you grow up being taught to ignore things just get worse down the road.
Right, and culturally, you pretty much are taught to ignore pain. And I think the intention is probably good, because you don't want to be you don't want your 3-year-old, when they fall down and they scrape their knee a little bit and then they're wailing, you don't want to foster that response to pain. So I think that's partly where it comes from.
It's just a little scrape. It's not a big deal.
Right.
And you teach them to walk it off because it's not a big deal. If I hit my elbow on the door frame and it hurts, I hit my funny bone, the humerus. Even though you don't actually hit the humerus, you actually hit what's usually around what's called the olecranon process, which is on one of your forearm bones. When it's not going to be a big deal.
Right.
I'll hit it, I'll flail my arm around, I'll rub it for a couple minutes, 5 minutes later, it's fine. There's this idea of, you need to understand where the pain came from and if it's something worth ignoring. So if you have pain that just erupts out of what you're perceiving out of nowhere, you just woke up one day and your knee is swollen to the size of a grapefruit.
That's a problem.
That's a problem, but a lot of people will still ignore that. And it hurts like crazy. They're just like, well, I've been taught my whole life to ignore it because it's pain. So I'm just going to ignore it. And that is what a lot of people will do. Not all, but a lot of people will. And so learning to ignore these input signals that their body's given them will just be a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Literally.
Literally. And one that you may have to later have surgery for if you don't address it.
Yeah.
Talking about the neck pain thing, this is something that the Facebook ads always crack me up, because I don't know, Facebook will think that it knows something about me. Like, apparently it thinks that I have neck pain.
You don't know me, Facebook.
I don't know what I did, but Facebook has recently been convinced that I have neck pain. I didn't search anything. I don't have neck pain.
Are you sure?
But Facebook thinks, I don't know. Maybe I do. Maybe Facebook knows something about me that I don't even know.
Like, are you sure you don't have this neck pain, but you're just not ignoring it? Or you just are ignoring it?
Maybe I am. Maybe Facebook's trying to help me.
Maybe.
So I've seen a lot of these ads for products where you suspend the neck on a door frame or something with like a cloth. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a hammock for your head.
So. Almost like a hammock.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a head hammock.
Yeah.
What's the mechanics behind that?
So one, it's going to let your head relax.
Yeah.
So like I was saying, to lay on the floor for low back pain to help things relax. If you can get the back of your head to relax on something, it wouldn't necessarily be too different from just simply laying down in bed and being like completely flat. But a couple of ideas that are going on here is that your head won't have to support itself. So the muscles that are supporting it can just finally turn off. Things like that will generally go around the base of the skull.
Yes.
So you can create what's called a distraction. In physiology, you have traction and distraction. Traction is something that people have probably heard of. Like if someone's been in a motor vehicle incident and their spine was shattered, they were taken to the hospital, and part of the care is that they were held in traction, where their spine was gently held together so it could heal. You also have distraction, where you gently pull a joint apart. So when you have a little bit of pressure along your neck and you can just let it like lean back and relax, and it can gently allow your cervical vertebra, your neck vertebra to distract and open up a little bit.
So there's a method to the madness. It's not just like
absolutely.
It's not just a snake oil or anything like that.
Nah.
Well, it's hard because like you see these people in these head hammocks and then they'll do their testimonials like, he changed my life. And I'm like, what's actually going on here? How is this changing your life? But that makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially if you have that chronic tension or problem in your neck. The third mobility problem that you put on here, we've touched on a little bit, but it's chronic sitting.
Yeah. Lifestyle, like living in the West, we sit. That's what we do.
Yeah.
That's how we've kind of catered to our lifestyle. If you go to school, you go to uni, you go to college, you're going to be sat down in your class.
Go to uni.
Yeah, we say that over here in the UK, uni. No one actually says university.
Uni. Bit of
I'm kidding, they
tea.
do, but a lot of people do abbreviate it to uni. Kelly Starrett and his wife. Kelly Starrett's a physical therapist, probably one of the most famous physical therapists in the world.
This is the supple leopard guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he and his wife have a nonprofit organization called Stand Up Kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I might have some details wrong, but the general idea will be there. I think with their kids' high school, they turned their high school into the very first stand-up classroom.
Yeah.
So they completely removed the seated desks and they funded stand-up desks for everybody. They did that for at least the classroom, not the whole school. And they're trying to reach out to more schools in America to get that done so that kids can grow up having full range of motion in their hips.
Right. They're not being trained to sit.
Because something that they're noticing is that, you take a sleep-deprived teenager, because all teenagers are sleep-deprived, and then you put them in a chair, which is a very sedating position. Your body doesn't have to be alert because it's being supported by a chair. It doesn't have to support itself.
Yeah.
And then you turn off the lights and use an overhead projector to teach.
Yeah.
You're just like encouraging them to sleep while also trying to encourage them to be extremely cognitively intact. And there's a big conflict there that does not work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're, as the teacher, presumably you're trying to say, I need you to be at your most alert right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, really?
Throw your
But
desk away and stand up.
It's like you're also dangling like a hypnosis ball in front of their face while asking them to be as alert as possible.
You start going to school around the age of 4, and you will have a lot of playtime. But playtime, recess, for me personally, I think 3rd grade, so at about age 8, 9, I think, was our last year of recess.
Yeah.
So from 4th grade, so at about age 10 or so, we then just had a 15-minute break in the middle of the day. So we didn't actually go outside. So you're looking at these 10-year-old kids who are like nuclear furnaces in terms of their metabolism.
Right.
They have to be moving around,
right,
but they're being cramped in and they can't move. And so they're expressing much less range of motion. So, you fast forward 10 years and it's no wonder that you get this 15-year-old kid who cannot do a full squat.
Yeah. Crazy.
And then you fast forward, another 10 years and it's like, my knees really hurt like all the time. And still nothing happens. They continue with this seated lifestyle. Then they get to 35, 40, 45, and now you need a knee replacement.
I've heard that the squat as an archetypal movement is one of the best indicators of like health, overall health, if you're talking about just a movement and your ability to do it. Would you agree with that? I'm guessing.
Yes, absolutely. If you can do a full range squat, and especially if you can sit down to the floor without using your hands, without using your arms, then it is a well-regarded fact that you're going to live a lot longer just because your body is in much better overall health.
Yeah.
But your ankles are going to have much more range of motion. Your knees are going to have much more range of motion. Your hips are going to have much more range of motion, which means all the muscles that connect them and hold them together are going to be a lot more relaxed and longer and stronger.
Yeah.
So you're not going to have as much degradation.
And for context, for people listening, that's with your heels flat on the ground, right?
Yeah, that's what we prefer to do.
Yeah, generally.
But it's like a lost art, squatting with flat feet. That's why, like, you have Olympic weightlifting shoes. Like you have workout shoes and you have tennis shoes. I can't remember what they call them here. What do they call them here in the UK? What do you call shoes here? Trainers.
Trainers.
Yes. So you have this generic word, trainers, to specifically refer to shoes.
Yeah.
Anyways, and like you get ones that are meant for like different sports or for running or even for generic exercise. Right. But then you have Olympic weightlifting shoes, which have like a 2-inch heel because you're usually lifting, or the end one of the end positions of the lift will be in a deep squat with weight over your head. And if you don't have like full ankle range of motion, which most people don't, then they're not going to be able to do that lift. So we have lifters to help compensate for that.
Right.
And they do make a big difference. They allow people to lift so much more weight.
Are you a fan of minimalist or maximalist shoes, or shoes that have like zero drop heels, things like that?
Yes.
I switched to those about 3 years ago after you posted a video. First, I went to the minimalist route and wore limbs for a long time, they're just a minimalist shoe. And then when I started teaching all day, standing up all the time, I went to Hoka's because they just have more cushion. But it's the same idea. There's zero drop heel, wide toe box. And after being on that for so long, if I put on like a pair of regular New Balance now, I hate it. It feels like my feet are in prison just immediately.
Yeah. And that's a very apt word as well, prison. A lot of shoes are extremely tight and they force your toes. So like, I should be able to do this with my hand.
Yes.
Anyone should.
And
but shoes kind of make your toes do that. And that's not the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
It's almost like they assume the big toe is the one in the middle.
Right.
It's smaller going out to the sides. So it's important to wear shoes that you should be able to splay out your toes in your shoe.
Well, then you imagine people who are in business who wear, dress shoes.
No, it's horrible.
Every day. And then your toes over time wind up looking like this, where everything's just crammed together.
It actually warps your skeleton.
Yeah, I believe it.
We talked earlier about how your muscles will adapt. Your skeleton will as well, and your ligaments. And your bones and your ligaments will bend and move around. And that's where you get bunions and hammer toes, where your toes can basically go to, I've never actually seen to 90 degrees, but to like 45 degrees over.
So, fourth thing on your list of 5 mobility problems. This one is really interesting because I think it may get into your own personal story a little bit. The inability to run well.
Yep.
So people are generally, this is something that you have talked about before, that no one ever teaches you basically how to run. You just learn naturally how to walk, and then it's presumed that you'll just be able to run. Even if you're an athlete, you may grow up and play soccer or football or something in school, and you're running this whole time, and the coach never trains you to do that because it's presumed you already can. And so that leads maybe to what you're talking about.
Well, more than likely your history teacher in high school didn't have any idea how to run either.
Yeah.
Just let's be honest, your football coach was your history techer. You ever notice that? In real life and in cinema, it's always like that.
I have noticed it. I have a friend who's a history teacher, and he could complain about that quite a lot. And yeah, maybe I'll get him on here sometime, because a lot of times, I don't know if you've noticed, and this isn't always the case, but a lot of times those history teachers, not exactly there to teach history. Maybe not all that interested in being a great history teacher.
So I'm going to say something that might piss people off.
Say it. Piss. I mean, don't piss. That'd be weird.
No. Yeah, piss means so many things here. It can mean you're angry.
Oh, yeah, you can take the piss out of people, right?
Or
Is that
take
like
the piss
screwing
out of
with
people,
that's
you're
like
making
screwing
fun of
with you,
them.
right? Yeah, making fun.
Yeah, such a fun expression. Sports coaches, the vast majority of them don't know much of anything about athletics.
Yeah.
They know about their sport, and they're more of the sports strategist.
Yes, they know the game.
They know the game, and they're very good at that. But when it comes to actually performing in the weight room, they are going to mimic what they did in their younger days.
And they're the ones that are instructing you as a young person on how to do this.
Yeah. So something that, let's say, I've only been seriously involved in athletics since I was about 20 or so.
Yeah.
Give or take. So I played tennis and I ran all throughout high school, but I was never an athlete until college. And I didn't care about being an athlete. I didn't like being an athlete, probably because that's something that was like enforced on me from a very young age. I grew up the youngest of 6 kids, and like everyone played something.
Right.
I highly doubt you remember this, but I grew up extremely shy. And so like up until about my 20s, I was extremely shy, like dysfunctionally shy. I couldn't function socially. I was too shy. I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know how to talk to people. And I didn't really learn that until near enough my 20s.
Yeah.
I was very shy, but I simultaneously grew up. I never wanted to do what other people were doing. I always wanted to do more of my own thing. It's like my family would really be trying to, like, gently, they were nice about it, but always trying to get me to find a sport to play. And just because it's what everyone else in the family did. Like, my sisters collectively played volleyball for about 150 years and softball as well. And, you know, there's a lot of sport. My family loves American football religiously.
Yeah.
I don't care anything about it just because, you know, that's how I raised. I was not how I was raised, like, externally, but on my inside, I didn't care about what everyone else did. It's like I never did athletics until I had some friends in high school that did, and then we started playing tennis. I did cross country. I did actually play American football.
Really?
But that was in the midst of my angsty teen years, and I only played it because I got to run around and hit people. And that was fun. And then I went into martial arts, like, straight out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say, I'm all for hitting people.
Yeah, it's fun.
Just for people to know, we know each other through martial arts. Ethan's another person that does Budo Taijutsu. So, man, and you want to talk about, like, when I sat down to start doing this podcast, the amount of people that you meet through martial arts that just have, like, such varied interest. I was like, I've got a plethora of people. I'm just going to start going down the line. So, but yeah, so you ran track a little bit though, right?
Yeah, cross country. Yeah,
cross country.
I did that for 2 years, and I was, like, perpetually broken for all those years.
Were you running that incorrectly, like what you're talking about?
Yeah, like, horribly. Like, I've always loved running. Like, I can remember just being a little kid, always wanting to, like, race people. Running was always my thing. And it was weird that I never cared anything about sports, but I loved to run.
Mm-hmm.
And that developed into, like, I'm a CrossFit coach as well, which is the sport of fitness. It's like, usually people use fitness as a way to get better for a sport, but we use fitness as a way of, you know, boosting health and being able to jerk as much weight as you can over your head. And that kind of fell into line with me. So how you run isn't really something that, unless you grew up running barefoot, it's not something that you do well. When you run barefoot, when I say this, I think anyone who hears this part is going to kind of psychologically get a little bit funny. But when you run barefoot outside on the asphalt, you will run differently than if you have all this protective cushionings around your feet called shoes. The way you move will completely change.
And it becomes more correct.
Yeah. If you want to define correct as meaning that you're not going to have as much pain and as much injuries over time, and you're going to have more longevity with your sport. Yeah.
Yes. How does that happen mechanically?
Like, over time?
Well, like, what are the mechanics of if you go outside and you're barefoot on asphalt, what is it that makes you say that, as far as you would be running more correctly?
So usually when most people run, they do what's known as heel striking, meaning they reach their leg out in front of their body, and the first point of contact is their heel. Yeah. You will not do that when you're barefoot, unless you're on a very soft ground, like in the sand. If you're on a firm surface, even just like hard dirt, and especially if you're on concrete or asphalt or, you know, any kind of pavement, you will not heel strike. You can force yourself to do it, but kind of instinctively your brain will want to take over, and it will not let you run very well. You will kind of tiptoe, which is more close to how you should be running mechanically. Yeah. When we're talking about ideal running mechanics, it's landing on the ball of your foot, meaning the area in between your arch and your toes, because that's where you're meant to land. And this is very easy. Like, I've never actually heard anyone try to have an argument for heel striking. The only people that I've ever heard who are for it are people who do that and they don't want to change how they do it, because that's the way they do it. And it's very silly, but it's very easy to show. Like, if you stand up, anyone who's listening to this, stand up right now, barefoot, and just start jumping in place like you're jumping rope. You're going to jump on the balls of your feet.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I can envision it in my head, and certainly that would be what would be the most natural thing.
Yeah. So now lift your toes up and try to balance yourself on your heels, and now jump.
That's going to go well.
Yeah, like, mechanically it doesn't work because there's no spring there.
Yeah, there's no leverage. There's
no energy absorption.
Yeah. No.
So equal and opposite reactions, right? Your heel hits the ground and all that energy is going to get dispersed through your entire body. You will feel the jerking in your head. Whereas when you're jumping, landing on the balls of your feet, you will feel your whole body shaking, but it's going to be way less because most of the energy will get distributed through your arch and through your ankle. That's why you have an arch.
It's like a shock absorber.
Yeah, it's a spring. No other creature on the planet has a foot arch. Human beings are the best endurance runners on the planet. And part of that's due to being bipedal, but humans are the only bipedal creatures on the planet. You do have birds. Birds are kind of different. And birds often don't actually walk, they hop. If they're on the ground. Not all of them do. Like seagulls will walk, but I hate seagulls. We live on the coast, and there's seagulls everywhere, and we often get woken up to seagulls being obnoxiously loud, and I hate seagulls. And it makes me wonder how, there can be such massive gun restrictions here. Everyone will want a firearm just to take care of these gulls. But anyways, my wife is going to be so disappointed that I had that little rant when she listens to this. She gets so tired of me going on and on about how much I hate seagulls. Anyways, what was the question?
Oh, we were talking about bipedal.
Yeah,
people.
the arch. The arch is there to act as a spring. When you don't use it, people's arches can collapse. And so there's this phenomenon of collapsed arches or collapsed feet, collapsed ankles, where your tibia is basically dislocating by falling off to the inside. And so you no longer have that springiness, and running and jumping is now an indicator that that person is probably going to tear an ACL. Just because there's more internal rotation at the knee. So their femur is turning towards the inside, and that creates slack in the knee. So it's more loose. It's more loosey-goosey. So your springy arch is there. Use it.
Yeah.
But when we try to get people to change how they're running, it's a completely different skill set. You're moving your legs in a completely different way, and it takes training.
You can't just do it. Well, you can, but you can't ensure that it's going to...
You're completely rewiring how your muscles are used for an activity that you've been doing for most of your life.
Yeah.
It's a pretty deep set habit. I didn't really take it seriously at first, but it was probably damn near a year before I felt like I was actually competent at running on my heels. Because the thing is that when you're running, the idea is to get from point A to point B as fast as you can.
Yeah.
On foot. How you go about that, that's up to you. You do you. But typically, if the goal is to get there as fast as possible, you want to go for efficiency. The most efficient way to get from point A to point B is a straight line. When people heel strike, they jump up and down.
So they're actually wasting some energy.
You can watch their head moving up and down. When you learn to run on the balls of your feet, something that you learn is that you fall forward.
Yeah.
You literally lead with your hips, like you're falling down, and you pick up your feet. You can pick them up in front of you or behind you. Behind you is slightly more efficient because when you pick up your legs in front of you, your leg will land slightly more in front of you. So it just means more mass that you have to go over. Whereas and this may not make a lot of sense, but if you're pulling your leg behind you with your big, massive hamstrings, the largest muscles in your body, and that have the greatest capacity for endurance, then the ball of your foot lands much more just right underneath your body, not in front of you.
Yeah.
And so you're going to just keep perpetually falling forward. So it's just an option between going up and down as you're running, which is you're going to get exhausted much faster. You're not going to be able to go as fast. You're not going to have as much endurance, but you're still running. And the likelihood, it's not a sure fact, but the likelihood of you developing, plantar fasciitis, shin splints, knee pain, quad and hamstring strains, lower back pain, hip problems, it escalates drastically when you heel strike, just because of all that impact over and over again.
You're also using gravity when you're running properly, right? I mean, you get the bonus of...
Yeah, maybe that's why people don't want to do it, because they think you're cheating.
I haven't practiced it. I got to be honest with you. I have not practiced really, but I've just very slightly attempted some of the things you've shown in your video as far as the falling forward idea before. And it's even without mastering it or practicing it or anything, you can immediately feel that pull of gravity and how it's much more, you can feel that it's more efficient, even if it's a little scary.
Yeah, and once you get over that fear, when I teach people to run, I also teach them how to fall. So thank my martial arts background on that, but we talk about how to catch yourself in case you fall. And no one that I've ever worked with has ever fallen. But getting them over that fear of falling allows them to embrace it more. And yeah, you're just falling forward. if you think about the satellites that orbit the Earth, that get sent up into space, they don't fly.
Right, they're just falling.
They are falling perpetually at the exact same pace that the Earth is moving away from them.
Mm-hmm.
Running is the exact same thing. In a way, not exactly the same thing, but it's basically the same thing. You're just perpetually falling, and you just barely catch yourself with your legs, using the ball of your foot and your ankle to compress. Your ankle will bend, and your arch will kind of collapse with every single step, and that provides time to distribute energy, the impact energy, that kinetic energy. Yeah, that's all it is. You're just falling forward, and you're letting gravity just push you forward instead of propelling yourself forward by jumping up and forward. With every single step, it's so much more energy inefficient to do it like that. So yeah, you can be a heel striker. It's not wrong. I don't like to say it's right or wrong, but it's not as efficient. You're not going to be as a powerful runner, period. Mm-hmm. There is no like professional runner in the world that runs on their heels. It doesn't happen because they can't get that good. Mechanically, it just doesn't happen. But you can run like that if you want.
Yeah.
You're going to have a much greater likelihood of developing problems. Or you can just find a good quality coach. It's becoming much more common to find coaches who teach this stuff and just get them, just spend a day. And if it's a good quality coach, that day will help you to start to build the habits. And then just spend a month practicing those and hey, you got a new habit. And now you just do it without thinking about it.
You talked a little bit about being really shy. When we met, I think we were probably both about 18, and I was probably similarly a shy person. So on that part, it's hard for me to tell because, I was new at least to the martial art and to everybody. And when you're in that fixed space, especially when we're from two different dojos, so we only ever really saw each other at first at like seminars, things like that. So I don't remember personality-wise so much, but I will say that I remember you being hunched over a good bit, or you being, like that was fairly obvious. And now your posture's, as pretty much ideal.
I just like to show off my chest. I think I have great pecs.
So, how did your journey, and then we'll get back to the last mobility issue, but how did you get into this? So like you go from this kid who's kind of screwed up physically, be it from the combination of heel striking and a whole lot of other stuff, maybe even like you're saying, personality stuff where you were drawn into yourself.
Yeah.
How do you go from that to now you're a mobility coach?
It was a bit of a journey. I actually have it written down because there is a long list of funny coincidences that happened, and it felt like fate.
Synchronicities, man.
I don't know if fate is something that I necessarily believe in, but there were a lot of coincidences that seemed to be almost forcing me down a certain road. Mm-hmm. Or maybe not fate, more destiny, because I think the idea of fate is that it acts regardless of free will, whereas destiny is something that you choose.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I was never into athletics, but I always enjoyed learning physiology and learning about the body since a very young age. And so when it came to be time to start going to college, I started thinking about, what's something, I have this academic educational interest in anatomy and physiology. How can I apply that towards being of service to other people? And so I started to look at things like physical therapy and athletic training. And when I started off in the athletic training program, and this is something, so I went to community college first for 2 years, got as much of the core academic subjects out of the way so I could focus entirely on my major. When I went to uni. So I was hell-bent on becoming an athletic trainer and then going to physical therapy for grad school. Yeah. And I got into the athletic training program and dropped out after about 2 weeks because of the things that I saw. When I went to uni and I got accepted to this athletic training program, what I saw, I didn't have any education in this stuff at all. And healthcare and how to take care of the body. I didn't know anything. Everything was brand new to me. But I had this gut feeling that things were just wrong. How I was seeing athletes being taken care of was so suboptimal. We had an athlete who was suffering from hip pain. It was a track athlete, I think it was. It doesn't really matter. But someone who was having hip pain. So you had this athletic trainer, which is basically a physical therapist. Just they tend to work out in the sports fields rather than in an office kind of area. That's really the only difference. And they get paid half the amount. But you had this athletic trainer who had been one for like a good 20 years or so. And he was like looking at this person's legs. Like one was shorter than the other. So he's going to do some mobility work to get the other leg to be a little bit longer. So he literally just grabs this guy's ankle and just jerks on it. And that's like the biggest thing that stands out to me with what I saw. But there were other examples. It was like the healthcare that I saw being provided for getting these people back to their sport. It didn't really connect to their sport. So what I started to notice was that people were developing pain. And when they got treated for their pain. And I didn't understand this at first, but pain is a symptom. It's not a problem. Your problem is not that you can feel pain. You want to be able to feel pain.
Yeah.
So that when you lean over onto that lit or a stove eye or stove hob,
You don't burn yourself.
you feel it, and then you
Yeah,
pull away, and then you're not, caught on fire. So, I dropped out on a gut feeling of this university program that I was hell-bent on getting into for, most of my adult life at that point. And so I went for that rest of the semester. This was like my 5th semester of college/university. And so I changed my major from athletic training to exercise physiology. Like, what is exercise physiology? I don't even know. And so it was just kind of a way to buy time so that I could experience life a little bit more and find out what I wanted to do. And so the next year rolls around. Actually, that summer, I go with Michael Tucker. So that's Caleb's martial arts instructor and very good friends with my instructor. And he pulled out a book when we were in Atlanta for the seminar. He's like, hey, Ethan, you might like this book. It was written by a physical therapist. And my honest to God impression was, Tucker shouldn't have said that. He should have just handed me the book and be like, hey, you might like this. And I was like, great, physical therapist.
Right, you were done with physical therapists.
And I didn't really look at it, but there was a book called Becoming a Supple Leopard, which, what a stupid name. So I'm like, okay, it's written by a physical therapist. At that point, I have kind of almost irrationally, but a kind of stupid and petty and immature idea of, like, I didn't look at physical therapists with a high regard. Whenever I went to physical therapy because I had horrible shin splints in high school, which is just basically where your shin muscles are being ripped off the bone due to overdevelopment of the muscles. They thought that I might have stress fractures, meaning that the tibia, the shin bone, they thought was actually cracking. I was running about 20 miles a week. If you don't know, that is an extremely low amount of running.
Well, I mean, marathon is 26 miles.
26.2 kilometers
in
or miles. 26.2 miles, yeah. So 20 miles a week, not even a marathon a week. Most high school, I won't say most, I don't have any way of actually justifying that, but my brother ran high school as well years before I did in late 90s, and they were doing more like 60 to 80 miles a week.
Yeah.
So significantly more training volume. And I was just doing this very petty amount, but I was having a lot of issues. And the only physical therapy I got was they would massage my shins. They would like rub and massage in some lotion. They would put some kind of like infrared light. I still don't know what that was over my leg because I was supposed to let it heal. I still have no idea what that was about. And I would spend time like stretching out my calves by myself because the physical therapist would be treating his other 10 clients for that hour. So nothing got done to actually help me run better. It was just, okay, you have some pain. Let's help mitigate the pain.
Yeah.
And so that was the care I got. And so I think unconsciously, like we talked at the beginning of this about having these input signals, like body language and stuff that you may not realize were there. I think I didn't really realize it, but I started to develop a hate for treating pain because pain isn't a problem. And I didn't understand that then. But anyways, so Tucker showed me the book Becoming a Supple Leopard in June or July that summer. Roll on August, I take another course under the exercise physiology major called stress management. And it was more of stress management of understanding the fight or flight response. Mm-hmm. And it was more biochemistry than how did that make you feel sort of thing. It wasn't like a psychology counselor sort of class. It was very biochemical. And it was one of the best classes I took in uni. So when I was starting off at uni, I had a little bit of extra spending money, and I was like, maybe I like trying to build my library of physical books. And I'd remember Tucker. Tucker's someone that I very much respect. And if he has an opinion on something, then I kind of listen to that. And he was like, he recommended a book, which to me says, read that freaking book. So I ended up buying the book off Amazon. The next day I go to my stress management class. And I was that guy who always sat in the front of the class. in like every single class. So the next morning, I had just ordered Becoming a Supple Leopard. That night, the next morning, I go to class and my teacher puts Becoming a Supple Leopard down on her desk.
Wow.
And I'm just like,
You're like, yep.
I just bought that last night. And she was like, oh, are you a moob guy? And I was like, what did you just call me? We do not say that word here. I was like, no, I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, a what guy? A moob guy, which turns out that's short for mobility. We started talking, and she, like, she doesn't know Kelly Starrett, who wrote the book, but she knows acquaintances of his. And so we got to talking about that stuff, and had a moment later on in the school year where, so she had arranged for us, that teacher, my stress management class, Dr. Hendricks, she had arranged for us to meet in this other building on campus. And on the note she sent out to everyone, the number didn't quite look right to me. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. And I went early, like the previous day, maybe when I had some free time, and I looked for the classroom, and she accidentally put her office number there instead of the room number. And I was like, oh, hi, you put this number for the thing? And she was like on her lunch break, and she had time to chat, and she was like, so what's up? How you doing? And we just started talking. And it was funny. She had like this kind of soft, cushiony, just like a small curved pillow that you can put into the back of your chair for your lower back. And it just helps to keep your lower back from extending outward. And I'm like, so you don't have low back pain. You're a young, healthy, strong, fit woman, former Marine, but you're using this thing that most people would only use until they've already had a bad low back problem. And I'm like, you're preventing that from happening. And I was so impressed by that. And she's looking at me, and she gives me the card to this physical therapist named Dr. Teresa Larson, who worked under Kelly Starrett. Yeah. And actually taught his mobility seminars for a time. And I ended up getting on a phone call with her. And then she called me to just like talk about the mobility stuff. Yeah. So we just kind of chatted about that, which was so cool. Like in hindsight, that's awesome that I got to meet her.
Yeah, for sure.
And so she had this big emphasis, Dr. Larson did when we were talking. This is what she was saying. She's like, we do what we do to help people, to help them get back to their lives, to help them do whatever it is they're passionate about, to do that better. And she kept emphasizing that, like the point is to help people. And so that's the part that really stuck out with me. And so I didn't have any teachers on the mobility stuff. I started off with Becoming a Supple Leopard. And it was hilarious when I first read that, because he's talking about these problems, like people have these body problems and stuff, but the kind of healthcare they're getting isn't really good for it. We need to be doing these other things. And he goes through the whole book talking about the different problems that bodies can have. Like when you have a perceived problem, it's either going to be a catastrophic problem, as in like when you have pain. It's either going to be catastrophe. That's like a freak accident. Some kind of external factor is there that collides with your body. Like you're just walking down the street and all of a sudden this rugby player comes out of nowhere and tackles you and shatters your legs. That can happen. Yeah. And when that happens, you have an understanding for the reason why your legs hurt so much. Or, you were in a car wreck and your spine is shattered. You have a reason for why your back is hurting so much. If you wake up and your lower back is hurting and you simultaneously are feeling very hot, you're maybe sweating a bit, you have the sniffles, you have a bit of a cough, maybe you have the flu. Yeah. So you have a pathological problem. Yeah. Pathological meaning disease. And when we say this, because this can be interpreted more vaguely than how I interpret it usually, but it means like a bacteria or a viral or a fungus infection. Something external on a microbial level is invading your body and causing you the pain, the discomfort, the dysfunction. You also have what happens if your muscles are just way too tight. You have immobility. You have the inability to move. So you have overtension as a problem as well. If you have your quadriceps, the muscles on the front of your thigh, they cross over the knee and they attach to this little lumpy bit of bone right below your kneecap called your tibial tuberosity. And it's a raised lump of bone because that's where all your muscles attach to, and that's where they pull from. So over time, your bone adapts. And pretty much everyone has this little lump on their tibia. Like anyone can feel that. Yeah. If those muscles get really tight, does it make sense that it's going to close the joint? It's going to put pressure on that joint. Yes. So now things are under a lot of tension. Things are grinding. You fast forward a few million repetitions, Because how many times do you sit and stand every single day, getting on and off the toilet, getting in and out of the car, to getting on and off the sofa? We can easily assume that people are knocking out millions of reps over the years, over the decades.
Yeah, for sure.
That can lead to dysfunction. That can lead, maybe that's why your knee is hurting so much, because things are just so dadgum tight.
All right.
So that's your body being used incorrectly, or being incorrectly taken care of. And then you also have, 4 points, catastrophe, something external and big, pathological or pathology, something external, microbial, invades your body and hurts it. And then overtension and motor control. So the way you move, the way you control your body matters. If you look at the knee anatomy, everyone can do this. This is really easy. If you hold up your hand and you're going to move your middle finger on top of your index finger, so they create an X. You see that X? Okay. It's an X.
Yes.
If I pin that down, this front finger represents my ACL. You've probably heard of the ACL. Almost everyone has, because it's so commonly torn. So why do ACL tears happen? Well, if I pin the bottom of this, so just around my fingertips, that's pinned. If I twist this externally, so to the outside, so I'm trying to raise my palm to the ceiling, your fingers get tighter.
Yeah, you can feel it.
Yeah, it creates tension, it creates stability. If you move to the inside, it creates slack. So the ACL is the anterior cruciate ligament. Mm-hmm. So the anterior front cruciate. I don't know if it's actually the right derivative, but it's like crucifixion, like cross.
Yeah, cross. I was about to say cross.
Yeah, ACL, they cross. And PCL, the posterior. So front crossing ligament, back crossing ligament. Anatomy is not hard.
It's just in Latin.
Yeah, exactly. Or Greek. Like psoas, that's Greek. Silent P at the front. Those are always Greek. Latin doesn't have a silent P.
Psychology.
If we apply this to the knee, if I turn my knee to the outside, I create stability. That's why we have the cue knees out when we squat. If you let it fall to the inside, then your ACL and your PCL, they unwind and creates more slack. You can dislocate the knees pretty easily by kicking them so that they go to the inside. If you kick to the inside, that will still hurt. That will still move the leg, but it won't dislocate the knee.
It won't dislocate. Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of motor control. You can control how your knee moves during a squat. If you grow up with your knees together all the time, which women do, which is why women have the vast majority of ACL tears and meniscus tears. Meniscus tears happen the exact same way. So now we have a mechanism for why those ACL tears happen. Women grow up usually wearing skirts and dresses.
Yes.
So from the time they're about 3, 4, 5, they're being taught anytime you sit and stand, your knees are together. If their feet are apart, then that creates a knock-kneed position. So it's like their feet are out, their knees come in. Right. And that impinges the ankle, knee, and hip, and by extension, the back as well. If you take these women going through millions of repetitions, they have this practice of anytime their hips are going up and down, their knees come to the inside. It becomes a habit. Now they're not thinking about it. So it doesn't matter how they're dressed. They can be wearing full pants or full trousers. If they're sitting and standing, their knees are together. So now they start playing sports. They start playing basketball and volleyball, and their knees are displaying that exact same motor control through these high-impact movements, these high-impact sports. So they're jumping all the time. Their knees are coming together over and over and over again. And years ago, we didn't recognize that was a problem, but now we're starting to understand that is the problem.
Yeah.
Not the knee pain that comes with it, not the meniscus tear or the ACL tear. That was a symptom. The problem is your motor control. You're moving your body in a bad position. And that's what we call a bad position, one that's dangerous, one that's going to lead to dysfunction, to pain, and to things rupturing. Because that's not normal.
Right.
Your knee is not supposed to explode. It's meant to live with you for your entire life. But people don't get that.
Perhaps the bad posture, the bad mobility is so common and leads to so many ACL tears that it's just so normalized amongst people that fancy themselves athletes.
I've talked about this in a lot of recent running posts where I'm like, running injuries are so freakishly common that it's considered just part of the territory.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's understood. And I understood this when I was in high school and I was running. Like, I'm a runner, so I'm going to be living in pain. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Ignore this feedback signal.
Right. That's healthy.
Yeah, exactly. But, you don't know any better. One of the biggest problems that I have as teaching what I teach, and I have to be extremely mindful as well as I can about how I talk about what I talk about, because I teach people how to do things like breathe.
Yeah.
How to squat, how to run, which are things that are considered like, of course I breathe well. I'm not dead, am I?
Right. Something I do all the time.
Yeah. And it's extremely hard. People take it for granted. And it's not really their fault in any way. If you grow up doing something all the time, and that's just the way you do it, it's a habit. Yeah. Habits develop so that you don't have to think about it. That's the whole point of it, so you can perform something on autopilot. So people grow up with a lot of breathing dysfunction, a lot of movement dysfunction. They're not aware of it, and it can be something almost like religiously, like it's a belief they have.
Yes.
You can't really change how people believe. So when I'm teaching people, I don't teach to convince anybody of anything. That's never my intention. I know what I do is good and it's powerful and it can change people's lives, but I don't try to convince people of that. I just present the information out there. I try and encourage people to go through the drills that we do, like in my mobility classes, and I just let them determine for themselves. And most people, not all, but most people will be like, okay, I can move a lot better. I just PR'd on my front squat, so I made a new record for it after doing this Ethan's mobility work. I feel amazing. There's no pain. I feel more alert, and I can move my body better. I have, a yard or a meter more range of motion, which may not be an exaggeration. And I try to produce as many visceral responses as I can. Get people to understand it with their bodies rather than intellectually. Because intellectually, people don't give a shit.
Well, intellectually, we can sit here and talk about all of this, and that's all one thing. But then having it ingrained in what you are, that's a different thing altogether.
Completely different.
Yeah.
You can know some things, right? But it's completely different to actually do it. And you may
it's
not
one
be
thing
aware
to
of that.
it's one thing for us to say, for you to tell me right now that hill striking is a problem, and me to agree with you, and it's another thing for me to actually go outside and not hill strike. That's a different thing.
That's why I always lead that conversation with get barefoot. I want your feet to be naked, and I want us to be on a hard surface, preferably concrete or steel, iron. Be on something freaking hard, not just dirt, not carpet. And I want you to try jumping on your heels.
Yeah.
Because that produces a tactile response and probably a pain response too. So yeah, it's really important to get people to understand this stuff with their bodies. So whenever I'm teaching, I'll do one of two things. I'll either start off, be like, okay guys, first 5 to 10 minutes, I'm talking. You're not going to understand anything that I say. Deal with it. We'll get to the good stuff later. And I go ahead and get all the talking out of my system. I'm not a very talkative person, which you won't know from listening to this.
I was going to say.
But I don't actually talk very much. I'm very quiet, and I'm usually pretty reserved. I keep to myself usually, unless I'm either drinking or if I'm talking about this kind of stuff. And then I don't shut up. But something that, as teachers, for any teacher, something we have to be mindful of is, what is your objective when you're teaching? Are you trying to make these people teachers, or are you trying to teach them to do something better? Most people that I work with, they don't give a shit about, their psoas muscle pulling on their spine.
Yes.
They want to either be stronger with their lifting, or they want to have less pain. That's what they care about, and that's what the objective has to be.
Right.
I might talk to them while I'm taking them through stuff, just to get it out of my system a bit. Yeah, you need to be really careful of that if your audience is not people who are up and coming teachers of that subject. Because if they're not, you're just going to turn them off really quickly.
Right. Well, they're not necessarily intellectually interested in it. They're physically, from a physical standpoint, they're interested in fixing the problem that they're experiencing, not necessarily understanding the anatomy of everything. And all that stuff.
I will occasionally and intentionally throw out the Latin anatomical names.
Yep.
Partly, most of all, to make myself sound smart. And I say that both in a slightly arrogant way, but also I want these people to understand that I know my shit. Yeah. And I know what I'm doing, and you should listen to me. But you can't overdo it. So I have to not dumb things down, but simplify it and have their bodies understand it as well as possible. You can't, when it comes to movement and mobility in sports, people have trouble transferring. It's like, okay, I'm just going to think about doing this movement and then just do it. That doesn't work. No. Think about it in martial arts. If you go to a seminar, it doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work that way. Yeah, exactly.
Most people cannot transfer movements like directly from their brain to their bodies like that.
To their body.
Their bodies have to actually do it. And so it's important, especially for me in my field, and because I'm usually working in the gym, I have to have this emphasis on, getting you to feel what I'm trying to get you to achieve. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you believe. I want you to actually feel it with your body. That's the important bit. But there's two big things in my field that come to mind on this that prevent that from happening. One is definitely ego, in the way of, I have this education, I should use it. Because going through all these anatomy and physiology and biomechanics classes, I was taught physiological language, anatomical language. So instead of saying to the side, you say lateral. Instead of saying further away from your midline, you say distal. It's good if you are a surgeon.
Yeah.
It's not good if you're a personal trainer. Do not talk to your clients like that. Do not tell your client to contralaterally rotate their, posterior gluteus maximus into hip external rotation. And, that was just a bunch of gobbledygook that didn't actually mean anything what I just said, but you get the idea.
Yes.
But there are personal trainers out there that talk like that.
This is a problem that I have griped probably every episode. I'm going to keep doing it. From a language teacher perspective, the emphasis on grammar that happens in teaching people how to speak a language is a thing that is very parallel to what you're talking about. You can go study, whatever language and learn all the terminology for what this particular conjugation or mood is called. And people then take that and approach their students with that system and the terminology for that system. And that's all well and good, but it's not functional for a student. It's just not functional. It's not going to get them to the goal where they need to just be able to speak. Unless they have a specific interest in going on to learn all those grammatical things about the language, it's really only as useful as far as it is functional in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you have to understand the objective of your students. Like, what are they actually here for? What are they wanting?
Yes.
And having a clear, understood objective can make a world of difference. I took Spanish in high school for 3 years, and there was a big emphasis on grammar.
Yes.
Which I guess was okay. Being an English speaker, Spanish grammar is a bit different, but it's not radically different.
It's not radically different.
It's not like Japanese. That's a completely different family of language. Has no similarities to Latin whatsoever.
You're right.
And so it's a completely different way of thinking. So when I was in high school studying Spanish, there was an emphasis on grammar. But conversely, when I was in university taking Japanese, our teacher, especially in the first two semesters, was more of, focus on getting your idea across.
Yes.
I'm not going to correct every single bit of grammar at all. Don't worry about that so much. Just worry about how are you getting your idea across.
Yes.
That's what communication is. That's what language is. How do you convey an idea verbally? Yep. Grammar is just the finesse, of how you get there. And that just gets into like the whole conversation of principles and tools or mechanics. Talking about movement and mobility stuff, we have principles of movements. Mm-hmm. And this is, you asked earlier, how did I get from being such a shy person?
Yes.
Talking about the shyness came with me developing a lot of confidence and what I do as a mobility trainer, as a mobility coach, because of the effect that I've been able to have on people.
Yeah.
Most of the clients that I've had are people who went to physical therapy. Mm-hmm. And this is going to sound terrible, but they went to physical therapists and they didn't get any help, so they came to me.
Yeah.
I am not bashing physical therapists at all. Yeah. But I will bash insurance companies who own physical therapists. Yeah. And that's another conversation. But I'm able to work. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not a doctor. Mm-hmm. I am a university dropout. I never got my degree. And I dropped out of uni because they didn't have what I was looking for.
Yeah.
After taking that stress management class becoming a supple leopard, I dropped out and I pursued personal training, which you don't need a college degree for. I finished 5.5 years of college and university with like $10,000 in debt. That's a win.
Yeah, there you go.
But so regardless of me not having like postgraduate training or something, that wasn't really important for what I do, for my objective. I can still work with people privately and get them out of pain and get them to squat and to be able to lift heavier weights. But because I work on things on a very foundational level, very first principle of movement that Kelly Starrett teaches in his method is spine first. Your spine is how your brain talks to your body. If you correctly organize the spine, then your brain can talk to your body more efficiently.
Yeah.
This is a rule. This is a principle of nature. It doesn't matter what activity you're doing. Spine first. If you're moving around with a overflexed or overextended spine, your capacity for movement will be lessened. Now, there are some movements, like if you try to pick up a refrigerator with a perfectly straight spine, not going to happen. You're going to bend over a bit. But we can brace it in a set position. The idea is that we don't want our spine moving under a load. That's a principle of movement. It doesn't matter what you're doing.
Do you think that I know that the system you teach is called yoga tuneup, which I mistakenly said you were a yoga instructor last time, but you're actually a yoga.
I don't know jack shit about yoga.
Yeah. So I was gonna say in yoga, especially if you get into like the what a lot of people would consider new agey today, but in the spiritual aspects of yoga, there's this ancient concept of like the energy systems that go up and down the spine and the chakras, and there's always this lining up. Do you think that's interesting to think about? I wonder if there's some parallels between that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the foundation of people thinking. It's like, hey, if I have good posture, I'm stronger.
Yeah.
If I have good posture, I have more endurance. I have more speed. I have more power. I have more attentiveness. I can think better. I have better reflexes. I heal faster.
Right.
So maybe there's an idea of that. And you can see that in like pictures and paintings throughout history. Of like people talking about either internal energy systems or showing like in wrestling and, old martial arts, the spine's always straight. You never see people with bent backs. That doesn't happen. But yeah, so I understand that. So spine first, we need to get people correctly organized. You can't breathe as well. There's something that anybody can do if you don't believe in that posture matters. Hinge over, try to take your rib cage to your hips, and then take a deep breath.
I'm going to do it right now.
Breathe in as deeply as you can. Yeah, that sucks. Stand up nice and tall and take a deep breath.
Right.
So
you're naturally compressing if you bend over.
That maybe if you are lifting weights and working out with a more organized ribcage and hips, that you can breathe a bit better and therefore have more energy.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. It makes sense, and that's the way it works. So that's the principle. And next principle is talking about torque. So torque just means rotational energy. People think about their joints as only moving up and down, two-directional. It's like very two-dimensional, but they also rotate, and they rotate to create stability. And this is one of the hardest things for people to understand, but a lot of issues, like when I talked about the knee and the ACL, that internal rotation is internal torque, internal rotation. That's bad. And what turns out is that if your body parts are in front of you, if your legs or your arms are in front, you create external rotation to create stability.
Yeah.
For the arms, this looks like elbows in. For the legs, this looks like knees out. If your limbs are behind you, it's reversed. You create internal rotation to create stability at the hips and at the shoulders, not at the wrists and elbows and knees. Right. Knees don't internally rotate, period. But the hips and the shoulders do. That's why if you try to reach behind you, like say if you're driving and you try to reach behind you,
yes,
is your palm going to stay forward or is it going to turn down and back?
That would turn.
Yeah. So have your arm up in front of you, palm up, and try to reach behind you, keeping your palm up. How much range of motion?
Oh, yeah, that completely, it stops right about there if I turn it up. Oh, yeah.
You internally rotate, and now suddenly you have another foot of range of motion.
Yeah, oh, for sure, yeah.
It's a principle of the human body, of movement. Yeah. You create torque in the right way, you create stability. You create it in the wrong way, you create instability. People in the Bujinkan don't know they're getting taught that, but that's what you're taught, geek speak, and during the Trite, during the Kion Hapo, those 5 grappling maneuvers.
Yes.
They're all about creating torque. They're all about creating rotation through the arms.
Yeah.
And it's always done in external rotation. This is where people would always fuck up with me by creating internal rotation in my arms. And I would always be able to like slide out of things just because you didn't create enough stability. So I wasn't stuck.
Right.
There was too much slack in the system, so I was always able to wiggle out, and Orlando would always hit me for that. Anyways, well, it's like people always thought that I was really flexible and stuff. I'm like, I'm not flexible. You're just not creating rotation.
Yeah.
You're using these grappling techniques two-dimensionally. You're basically only moving the arm up or down. You have to rotate.
Yes. This would be a time when having video would be useful, but it's just an audio podcast for now. But no, for sure. I completely can see what you're talking about in my mind. For example, there's a technique that we use in taijutsu called amotsugaku, which is a wrist. What would you call it? A wrist grappling thing. You're trying to break the guy's wrist.
Japanese translation is outward reversal.
Yes,
and I've never understood the word reversal. But yeah, you can say wrist twist.
But a lot of times people will take that, and this is especially people who are new to it, and also people who are just being lazy, frankly, to it as well. They'll take that wrist, you grab someone's wrist, and you basically rotate it to the outside. They'll take it and they'll just pull it straight back as if that's supposed to do something. And they won't rotate, but really you have to rotate it.
It's
around
hard.
To the outside, and you also have to rotate it internally a little bit. Not internally, but the wrist needs to go this way and this way at the same time, right?
Yeah,
to create that
so
where it actually, I'm sure everyone listening is like, yeah, of course. You have to have all that intact and get that full rotation for it to even work in the first place. If you just pull someone by the wrist, it's like that doesn't do anything at all. There's nothing.
I don't know why, but for some reason it's hard for people to understand the rotation aspect. I think just because it literally adds another dimension of thinking, and it's just more complex. But once you understand it, again, this is a principle of movement.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what sport you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you're playing tennis, if you're playing squash, if you're playing racquetball, if you're playing badminton, if you're playing cricket.
God, you're so British.
I'm so British saying cricket. People play cricket. Like, you go out to the parks, just like 10 minutes down the road, people are playing cricket out there.
And they're playing cricket
right now. But yeah, because torque applies to how your body responds to physics and how physics interacts with your body. It's a principle. It's very foundational. It doesn't matter what activity you're doing, these same rules apply.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what activity you're doing, your hip is still your hip. How it mechanically works doesn't change. And so I can understand that and be like, if a person has motor control or excess tension in their body, they have immobility, I can fix that.
Yes.
And that's extremely powerful. Because my objective when working with people is, like, I always start off, people usually start off a conversation with me asking how much I charge.
Mm-hmm.
I always shift that around to, what do you need? Like, what are you trying to do? What is your pain keeping you from doing? And I always have the emphasis on that. That's the objective. And that is a big difference that I give people. And that's why I can charge as much as I do, and why people love my services.
Yeah.
Versus a lot of people have kind of a negative connotation towards physical therapists, because a lot of people go for that and they get their pain worked on. They work with me and I fix, their running problem or their squatting problem. And the emphasis is on getting you back to your sport.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. These people, they can't play tennis anymore because their shoulders and elbows just hurt so much.
Yeah.
People will be like, okay, let's take care of the pain. And that can include pain pills. That doesn't fix a problem.
That causes a problem.
And that's really the only difference. And not all physical therapists are like that. I want to say that explicitly. I'm not bashing them at all. But a lot of physical therapists, especially when they're working for a business that's owned by an insurance company, they cannot do their job well, and they are restricted in how they can care for you.
Yeah.
So find a physical therapist who charges cash that has nothing to do with insurance. Pay them. They'll be more expensive up front, but you'll get much better quality care. That's a little promotion for any cash physical therapist in your area.
And we have a mutual friend who's a physical therapist, and I've seen her work on, Caitlin. I've seen her work. The things that she would do are very similar to what I've seen, like what you've done. So just to reemphasize what you've already emphasized, there are definitely physical therapists out there that are not part of the problem. But then there's also a lot that are part of a problem. Yeah. And that same problem is the same problem in my mind that we talked about earlier, that part of it is the Western mindset of addressing symptoms and not addressing systems, really.
Yeah. One of the biggest issues is that a lot of physical therapists are controlled by insurance companies and what they can and cannot do, meaning that, you pay a copay, a small fee, and your insurance will then cover your care. But your insurance companies will only cover certain kinds of care that they have approved, and they may or may not know anything about healthcare. They should do, but they might not. And so the physical therapist can only do things that they will get reimbursed for, because you don't pay them. You pay the insurance company, and then they might reimburse the physical therapist. Sometimes they don't even get reimbursed. That can happen.
Right.
And that's why physical therapists, they might see 10 people at the same time in an hour, just trying to get as many people as they can so they can actually get paid a living wage. And I think a lot of physical therapists are making like 6 figures easily, but the point is that they can't always give the care that they want to.
Right.
And so a lot of the emphasis with physical therapists, with many of them, will be working on your pain, not on your problem. So if you're having difficulties with running and you go to a physical therapist because you have shin splints or whatever, and your doctor only works on your shin splints, they're just going to keep on happening because nothing's going to change with your running, which is the problem.
Before we get to the last point that you gave us, and you touched on it a tiny bit just a second ago, but before we get there, first I want to say thanks for coming on. This has been a fascinating episode.
Thanks for having me. I'm so delighted to be on this.
Yeah, this is great. I love this sort of thing. I listen to podcasts all the time, and I just love these sorts of conversations. I thought, why don't I just start doing them myself? But this is the sort of thing that I really enjoy, having someone on that can just talk about what they're passionate about in this way. And it's really fascinating to me to hear you talk about all this stuff. Is there, before we get to your last point, is there a plug yourself? How can we see your videos about running? How can we, are you on Instagram? I know you are, but I'll let you tell us how to find you.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So you can just do .com/EH mobility.
Yep.
That's one word for Facebook and YouTube. On Instagram, there are periods in between the E and H.
Okay.
And the H and M. So it's E.H. mobility.
Okay.
And that's my name, Ethan Hammond Mobility.
There you go, EH Mobility. Yeah. You got a blue shield, kind of like a family seal looking thing.
Shield against chronic pain and dysfunction.
Okay, perfect. And I definitely recommend, I'm going to go back and try to watch them because I only saw bits and pieces, but Ethan recently did a video series. Are you still working on the running series, or is it done?
So I did a little free YouTube series on running.
Yes.
That's a pretty good amount of information. I've started construction, and I'm getting people to sign up for a paid running course.
Oh, okay, awesome.
That's going to be entirely online.
Yeah.
But it'll be going over pretty much all aspects of running, from how do you run better. So it'll be a little bit on the geeky side to start. Like, these are the ideas of running.
Yes.
How do you run drills on practicing running better? There's a lot of things you can do to practice, the reflexes for running, the movements for running. And then how do you do self-care? Yeah. So that you don't go for a 3-mile run and then you just go home and get on your sofa and watch TV. There should be self-care done to help your body heal correctly.
When that comes out, I guess we'll be able to see how to access that on your social media, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So everybody go check that out. Check out the free information he put on YouTube, and then Ethan, EH Mobility on Facebook, Instagram, everywhere else, so that you can take that course when it's out. The last mobility problem, as we wrap up our show, the last mobility problem is the inability to breathe well.
Yeah.
This is something where you said a second ago, it's like, I'm still alive. Clearly I can breathe well. How do you respond to that when someone tells you that?
So you can live off of a minimal breathing for a while, and it will drive you insane, and you won't know that you're insane, but you'll be there. And we have a few different layers of breathing. Mm-hmm. People can breathe either in their neck, which is like gasping, like if you're having a panic attack, where the breath doesn't necessarily get to your lungs, it's just in your neck. So that's like panicked, high stimulation.
Right.
And if you're living there, you're living for a couple minutes and then you'll die. Next level down from that is chest breathing. This is where the vast majority of people live. And you can live there. You're using about 33% of your lungs. And that's the downside to it. You're not getting as much air into your body. So you're not utilizing your lung capacity very much. Lung capacity is one of the leading indicators of long-term longevity. So like if your lungs are big and massive and actually being used, you're probably going to live longer. Mm-hmm. And also not just simply live longer, but be healthier and be stronger while you live. Like be able to live a functional life, not just spending your last 40 years of life sat down in front of a TV. I guess that's a shame. But so you got neck breathing, chest breathing, and belly breathing. Mm-hmm. Belly breathing being your lungs are being fully filled up and your belly will expand. You should look a little bit fat when you take a full breath. It doesn't mean you're fat. It just means you're taking a full breath. Stop being so self-conscious of it, because that's something that can drive people to chest breathing. They don't want to look fat, and so they will tense up their abs, and that can start from a very young age and lead to a lot of dysfunction in their belly just because they can't take a full breath. And so they stop doing that, and for years and years they're just chest breathing, and now it's just what they do. So you can only use 33% of your lungs versus 100% of your lungs. The deeper you get into your lungs, the more cells, the more what are called alveoli, I think it's proper, which are like structures, little bubbly things in your lungs that actually absorb the oxygen. Mm-hmm. So the air actually diffuses through them directly into your bloodstream. You get more of them in the deeper parts of your lungs. Mm-hmm. So the air you're breathing in actually gets used more.
So you actually have more oxygen receptibility lower in your lungs. Okay.
You don't use all the oxygen that you breathe in. Like when you exhale, there will be some oxygen that leaves you. Yeah. The more deeply you breathe in, the less oxygen you'll exhale, because more of it's actually getting diffused into your bloodstream. You can think about that in terms of athleticism. You're not going to lose your breath as quickly, so you don't have to go try and find and catch it. Yeah. Like, where did I lose my breath? Is it down here under the chair? But yeah, people try to catch their breath. If you're working at like high intensity, like as hard as you can, you're going to lose it. That's just part of it. But for less stressful activities, like a simple run, athletes may be losing their breath really early on.
Yeah.
Because they didn't do any breathing practice beforehand, and or because they're breathing very shallowly. So they're just not getting any oxygen to their body. So they start huffing and puffing really soon. So you got this big breathing muscle inside your abdomen called your diaphragm.
Right.
And it's like a blanket. It just goes right underneath your heart. It's just skirting along the entire inside of your ribcage. It's a muscle, just like any muscle, although it seems to be a little bit special, and it seems to work automatically to a degree, probably because breathing is quite an automatic thing. You don't have to think about it. But it's very intimately connected to your brain, much more so than like your bicep is. Mm-hmm. Just like any other muscle, though, it responds to load and it responds to range of motion. So if you always breathe shallow, your diaphragm is never getting stretched out, going down.
Yes.
And so when it comes to exercise, you may not be breathing very deeply because you physically can't, because your diaphragm just won't stretch. And so I can like try to show someone, hey, do this, where you're like breathing in for a good like 5-6 seconds, and they physically can't do that.
Yeah.
And we can work with that. We can work to undo that, but your body will adapt to shallow breathing. That will become the norm for you. And so we can do a lot of drills, like an abdominal massage, where we take a soft inflated ball actually into the belly, and we massage out your intestines. It's always one of the most fun things to do.
Is that that idea of conditioning the diaphragm, do you think that ties into the sort of Wim Hof method and what he's doing? Yeah, okay. I know I've seen that you mentioned him before.
So typically, like in yoga practices, there's an emphasis on breathing to relax. With Wim Hof, it's an emphasis on using your breath to excite your body. Mm. And it's the exact same thing. You're just breathing, but it's the pattern in which you do it. Most people are, maybe not most, but typically when you're at rest, your breathing is neutral. Yeah. So it'll be like the same amount of time breathing in as the same amount of time breathing out. When you're doing something for relaxation, it'll be a big emphasis on, you take an inhale and then you take a very slow exhale.
Yeah.
That exhale, that long drawn out exhale, makes your diaphragm massage the largest nerve in your body called the vagus nerve, whose sole purpose is to get your body out of a fight or flight response and make your body relax. So the rest and digest.
Right.
When you do the opposite kind of breathing, you can do this now. It's like just taking a half-assed breath, but let it go slow. And then just take in a normal breath and let it out slow. If you can pay attention to your heart rate pretty quickly will start to slow down.
Yeah.
And if you can just simply be and just feel your heart rate, then you might feel that, or find your pulse, and you can feel that pretty quickly. Now do the opposite. Take a really big breath in, but you're going to let it go very choppy. So I'll lead by example.
Yeah.
So big, deep inhale, big, deep, aggressive, like really powerful inhale. And then just let it go very passively. Your heart rate's going to be speeding up as you do that.
Okay.
You just stimulated a bit of adrenaline.
Feel a little lightheaded.
Yeah. So that's all the extra oxygen getting to your body.
Yeah.
But it creates adrenaline and a cortisol response when you're doing that.
Yeah.
So you're actually perking your body up. You're actually creating that fight or flight response.
Right. I can feel it.
Yeah. If you do that for, a solid minute, your body, you'll probably feel a bit lightheaded if you're not used to it, but you'll also feel a bit hyped up. But yeah, because breathing is something that you're doing, even before you're born, it's not something that people think about. It's something that they take for granted, and it can be hard to teach people about breathing.
Right.
So again, you need to lead by having them actually do these breathing exercises and actually feel it.
I remember seeing there's a video of David Blaine explaining his one of his stunts where he held his breath for like insane amount of time. And
like
he did a lot of breath
or something?
Yeah, something crazy. He did a lot of breath training with a guy who does that, who will just go underwater and set records. And one of the big things that they focused on in that training was, even if you're just a regular schmo and you sort of hyperventilate right before going under, you'll add you'll at least double the amount of time that you could naturally stay under.
Because you're putting more oxygen in your blood. I'm going to slightly correct you. It means the exact same thing, but in the fitness space, we don't say hyperventilating.
Okay.
Because that has a negative connotation for you've lost control and you're having a panic attack. We say superventilating.
Okay. Makes sense.
Exactly the same meaning. It just means above, but it sounds cooler.
Right. It also doesn't have that panic attack
exactly. It doesn't have such a negative connotation.
Right.
Plus, it reminds you of Superman.
Yeah, there you go.
or it does for me, anyways.
All right, man. That's the 5, just to recap, the 5 things that we talked about. We talked about chronic low back pain, chronic neck pain, chronic sitting, inability to run, inability to breathe. Had a lot of great things to say about that. And thanks again for coming on this. I think you have a lot of knowledge that comes from what seems very obvious to me, just a natural passion for this. Which also always makes for the most interesting sit-downs, I guess, with people when they're actually devoted to something. So thanks again for everything that you've told us. You've certainly enlightened me.
Yeah, well,
I appreciate you coming on all the way from London, Britain. Cheerio.
Cheerio, mate.
So everybody, that was episode 3 of ConverSapien. Thanks again, Ethan, for joining us all the way from the UK. I'll see you all next week. Next week, we have on some people, including myself, who are survivors of Cushing syndrome. So we'll be talking about hypercortisolism. Yay, fun. Go check out the website again, ConverSapien Podcast. There's an S in there, .com. Support us on Patreon. Go check out EH Mobility on all of Ethan's social media. We will see you next week. Cheerio.